top 10 teams odds to win the Super Bowl. I find this pretty interesting, but the Seattle Seahawks are number one. Their odds to win the Super Bowl are plus 375. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL Top 10's for Friday. My name's Ernie Jennings. I'm your host. And we have I think it's going to be a fun podcast. Going to kind of start our switch over from the season to the playoffs. So we'll finish up with some team stats from 2025 season. And then we're going to look at some 10 key things to watch in this weekend's playoff games, as well as I'll give you the top 10 teams' odds to win the Super Bowl. Who's the odds-on favorite, down to who's number 10. And we'll look at that. So we'll look at those things today, and then we will have the weekend of football, NFL football, that is. Looking forward to the games on Saturday. Now, hopefully you can watch them all. A couple of the games are going to be on streaming channels, not just on your local network. So you're going to have to find them. Like I think Saturday night's Prime. Got to watch the game on Prime. And I'm not sure about Monday night. It might be Prime or Peacock or somebody, but it's not your regular networks. Pay attention to that. If you want to watch the games, you're going to have to maybe track them down a little bit more. I know a lot of people complain about that, but that's the way it is now. It's too much money. The NFL can sell one game to Prime for so much more money than just packaging them off as a whole. So they do it. But all right, let's take a look at some of these stats from the season, and then we'll move on. And these are team stats I'm going to look at. Just ones I've picked out kind of to gauge teams we've got in the playoffs in a way. And we'll start with top 10 teams' total offenses. This is as far as yards per game. And what I did, if you go to Just the Stats NFL and watch this on YouTube, you can do that. You can like and subscribe there. I have the numbers from 2025 for the teams, plus their stats for the last three games, to kind of see which teams are ascending or descending. This is just as far as team offense goes. So starting with total offense, for example, the Rams, LA Rams, ended the season number one in the NFL in total yards, with 394.6 yards. Second was Dallas Cowboys, 391.9. Those are your top two. No one else was over 380. That would have been New England Patriots were third at 379.4. So a bit of a gap between first and second and then third. Now, interestingly enough, the LA Rams, the last three games, have been averaging 446 yards a game. And the New England Patriots, who were third, have been averaging 450 yards a game. So despite the numbers, which are still high numbers, they're even doing better than they have been for the entire season. Now, versus, say, the Buffalo Bills, they're fourth. They had 376 yards a game for the season. The last three games, they've been averaging 353. So a little bit of a difference. And Detroit Lions, and you can see why they missed the playoffs, they were averaging 374 yards a game, but the last three games, only 348. So kind of a drop-off, and you can see that it affected them. The worst one, probably, and why they also missed the playoffs, was the Indianapolis Colts, who were ninth. They were averaging 346 yards a game. The last three games, though, they were averaging 290. Big difference. And probably the reason they couldn't win some of those they played some close games against Seattle, Houston, specifically. but could not get over the threshold, could not win the game. They ended up losing them in the fourth quarter. Total offense, the Rams number one. Looking at the team rushing offense, this is something different. Buffalo Bills are number one here. And for example, the Detroit Lions aren't even in the top 10 when it comes to rushing yards per game. So there's primarily passing. Buffalo Bills, 159.6 yards a game. Baltimore Ravens, 156.6. So those two are the top two. The next best was quite a ways away, 144 yards for the Chicago Bears a game. Quite a big difference there between number 1 and 2 and number 3. Now, when you're looking at this, again, the Buffalo Bills averaging basically 160 yards a game. The last three, though, they've been averaging 165 yards a game. And even more so was the Baltimore Ravens. Though they missed the playoffs, they went from 157 yards a game to 205 yards a game rushing the last three games. On the other hand, the Chicago Bears, who were third with 144 yards a game, the last three games, they've only been rushing for 108 yards a game. A big difference. Really big difference. One other team we'll look at, the New England Patriots, who I already mentioned were number 3 in total offense and have really boosted that mightily. The last three games, they had the best offense as far as the yardage goes. But the New England Patriots were 6th this season with 129 yards a game. But the last three games, they've been averaging 159 yards a game. Big jump there for them, too, which would have been the second highest total here, only behind the Baltimore Ravens. And the Buffalo Bills, I guess, were 165, so a little bit behind them as well. One other thing about this list is it doesn't seem to matter so much. You know, they make a big deal about the rushing offense, and you need to be able to run the ball in the playoffs. And yet, on the top 10 teams here, 2, 3, 4, only 5 of them, 5 out of the top 10 are in the playoffs. The other 5 are not, even though they're in the top 10 as far as rushing goes. All right. Now look at the team passing offense. The Rams, this is where the Rams were up there. Rams for the season, 268 yards passing a game. But the last three games, they've been averaging 319 yards a game. The only team over 300 yards. Dallas Cowboys were second with 266 yards a game. And then the Detroit Lions at 254. So again, a little bit of a gap between first and second and third. And again, here's the New England Patriots. Up there in rushing offense, 4th in passing offense. And they would have been second, actually, in the last three games. So they would have been first in rushing the last three games and second in passing. The New England Patriots are averaging 250 yards passing a game, but the last three games, they've been averaging 291 yards a game. Now, some of that has to do with who they're playing, but still, those are some big numbers. Trying to see if there's anybody else. The Seattle Seahawks are kind of interesting. They were averaging 228 yards passing a game for the entire season, but the last three games, only 183. So it's there's a big drop off there, 45 yards. So those are some of the numbers for the season so far. Now, this is an important one, obviously. This is points per game. Now, this stat, I hadn't looked at this stat for several weeks and actually back to week 14. So I left up week 14 to kind of compare these teams from week 14 to where they are at the end of the season. In week 14, the only team that was averaging 30 points a game was the Detroit Lions at 30.3. Well, they didn't stay there by the end of the season. The only team at the end of the season to be averaging 30 points a game was the Los Angeles Rams, 30.5 yards, 30.5 points per game. I'll get that straight. The New England Patriots were second with 28.8. So the Rams are averaging, close to 2 points more per game than any other team in the NFL. Seattle Seahawks, 28.4. Buffalo Bills and the Detroit Lions, 28.3. And then the Jacksonville Jaguars, 27.9. Those are your top 6 teams. So one team over 30, 4 teams over 28, and then the Jaguars at 27.9, so pretty close. Now, what's interesting about this is, again, where the teams were in Week 14 to where they are today. The Rams in Week 14 were 29.2, so they upped their score, their points per game by 1.3. Here's again the New England Patriots. This is one of the, I know they play an easy, I consider it a fairly easy schedule. They only beat one team with a winning record, and that was the Buffalo Bills, pretty much, or a couple teams, I should say. But still, they've been racking up some serious yardage and some points. New England Patriots in Week 14 were averaging 27 points a game. By the end of the season, 4 weeks later, they were averaging 28.8, so up 1.8. That's big. The only team bigger, was the Jacksonville Jaguars. In Week 14, they were averaging 25.2. By the end of the season, they were at 27.9. That's 2.7 points a game, almost a field goal better per game in the last 4 games. So big increase for them. The biggest decrease, and again, you can see why the Detroit Lions missed the playoffs. They went from 30.3 to 28.3, cost them the playoffs. The same with the Indianapolis Colts. Indianapolis Colts for weeks from the beginning of the season were averaging 33 points a game. Then it stayed over 30 for a while, but by Week 14, they were down to 28.9. By the end of the season, they were at 27.4, another 1.5 drop. Their team just disintegrated, and that was because of the level of talent and that they had to play against, as well as Daniel Jones going out. The only team from Week 14 to the end of the season that made it onto this top 10 that wasn't on it from the rest of the time was the San Francisco 49ers, who finished in the 10th spot with 25.7 points a game, which is quite a bit difference between, say, the Rams at 30.5. Almost 5 points a game there. So there's some big movers here up and down this list. But the biggest notice I when I was looking at this is the New England Patriots. All their numbers for the last 3 weeks, the last 4 weeks have been going up. Better offense, more points per game. The Jaguars have as well, but I think the Patriots have been even more impressive in that category, honestly. Now, when we're looking at one more stat we'll look at before we move on from the team stuff, and this is scoring margin. So, yeah, you score a lot of points, but how many do you give up? Dallas Cowboys are up there at the top of the list, but they're giving up, more points than they're putting out, which is why they ended up, not making the playoffs. So let's look at that. Now, this is, again, 2025 season, and then I'm doing the last 3 games as well. So kind of comparing where they are for the entire season versus what they've been doing the last 3. Again, this is some incredible numbers here. But the Seattle Seahawks ended the season with the best scoring margin, winning margin, 11.2, a plus 11.2 for the entire season. But the last 3 games, their winning margin has been plus 9.3, so almost a drop of 2 points a game. Now, even worse, the LA Rams are number 2. Now, this is interesting because both of these teams are from the same division, and they've played each other twice already. They could end up playing each other again, depending on if the Rams can beat Carolina, and everybody seems to think they will. But the Rams were second with a 10.1 plus scoring margin. But in the last 3 games, their scoring margin is plus 4.3. That's a drop of almost 6 points a game. That's pretty big, honestly. Their defense has been lacking a lot lately, and it will, I think, will be the reason if they don't make it, too far into the playoffs. It will be because their defense is not helping out their offense. Now, number 3, here's the New England Patriots again. So Seattle Seahawks 11.2, LA Rams plus 10.1, and the New England Patriots plus 10.0. Pretty good. Average scoring margin 10. What's even better is when you look at their scoring margin in the last 3 games. They're plus 21.3. They've been winning their last 3 games by an average of 3 touchdowns a game, 21 points a game. Now, number 4 I thought was pretty good until I saw the Patriots, but the Jaguars were 4th in scoring margin for the entire season, plus 8.1. So not too bad, 2 points behind the Patriots. And in the last 3 games, their winning margin has been plus 18. So really impressive as well. Those two by far are the top 2 teams. As far as the last 3 games, they would be 1-2, Patriots, Jaguars, and no one's even close. The next closest is the Buffalo Bills, who had a winning margin of plus 9.7. That's a full, 9 points behind the Jaguars and 12 points behind the Patriots. So huge difference. And the Buffalo Bills are 4th, but their scoring margin for the entire season is plus 6.8. And like I said, the Jaguars are plus 8.1. They play each other. So while the Buffalo Bills offense looks a little bit better, their defense is shakier. They're not winning games by as much as the Jaguars. So we'll see. It's going to be should be a good game, hopefully. Now, looking at this list again, on this list, the top 7 teams all are in the playoffs. The Detroit Lions are number 8 with a plus 4 for the season scoring margin. The problem is their last 3 games, they were minus 5, which is why they're not in the playoffs. And in fact, every team on this list that has a plus in the last 3 games made the playoffs. The 2 that didn't, who are in the negative, are not in the playoffs. So I mentioned the Detroit Lions, the last 3 games minus 5. Indianapolis Colts finished the season at plus 3.2 winning margin. But the last 3 games, they were a minus 11.7. They lost those last games and just crushed their season. You can just see it in the scoring margin. And the 9th team was San Francisco 49ers. They were at plus 3.9 for the season, but the last 3 games, they were plus 5. So again, with all those numbers, the most impressive team in offense in the last 3 games, last 4 games, is the New England Patriots. And so we'll see how that pans out. Is it just because of the lack of competition, or is it because their team is just gelling right at the right time? Same with the Jaguars. Their offense has jumped up dramatically in the last several games, not just the last 3 or 4, but the last 6. And their scoring margin has went way up. Is that because of who they played, or is their team gelling at just the right time? You hope it's the gelling at just the right time. And we'll find out come this Saturday and Sunday for these teams. Now, one team that's in the playoff that hasn't been on any of these lists is the Pittsburgh Steelers, 2 teams, and the Carolina Panthers. And obviously, when you look at the records, you can see why they're not on the top 10 in any categories as far as offense or even in scoring margins. So I do not expect either one of those teams to go too far in the playoffs. Okay, let's take a look at the top 10 things, top 10 key things to watch in this weekend's playoff games. Now, we'll start with number one, a wide open playoff field. They've been making a big deal of this season. There's no dominant team emerging from this season, with several, what they would say, traditional powerhouses not in the playoffs. The Chiefs been a long time. The Ravens, the Lions have been in and out, but they didn't even make the postseason. So it really makes this bracket interesting. Now, the one that's left, and there's been a lot of commenting about this, is the Buffalo Bills. This is a perennial playoff team. Is this their season? The Bills don't have to worry about the Baltimore Ravens, and they don't have to worry about Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. They beat the Chiefs every year, it seems like, in the regular season, but then they come to the playoffs, they can't beat the Chiefs. Well, they don't have to worry about that this time. All they got to do is beat the Jacksonville Jaguars, who haven't been in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens there. Number two, veteran quarterbacks versus the new wave. This is a big, interesting kind of contrast. You've got some of the veterans like Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Hurts, Matthew Stafford, all in the playoffs. But then you've got some newcomers, Drake May, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence. These are players who haven't been in the playoffs. They're younger players. Drake May, Bo Nix, and Caleb Williams, in fact, are only in their second year. So some analysts are calling it a potential changing of the guard. And we'll see how that goes, for some of these quarterbacks. Will the veterans like Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, and Jalen Hurts especially, and even Matthew Stafford, though I don't expect Matthew Stafford's team, the Rams, to lose. But what if all these guys lose, these veterans lose, and all the newcomers win? Bo Nix with Denver, he doesn't have to worry about it this week. He's got the bye week, so he can wait another week. Sam Darnold as well, bye week. But we'll see how these veterans fare in this postseason, in these playoffs, and compared to the newcomers. It's kind of a fascinating change. And there are some excellent quarterbacks, I just mentioned them all, that are coming up this year that are going to be fun to watch. It's pretty exciting to see the numbers they're going to put up. All right, number three is the Rams-Panthers rematch after a shocking upset. In week 13, the Rams went to Carolina expecting to win, and they lost. They got beat. It was stunning. I mean, it was amazing that they lost that game. But now they meet again, and obviously the odds makers don't believe that Carolina can do it again, because Rams are double-digit favorites to win this game. They're pretty healthy, but Carolina's defense has been one of their better ones. And the Rams' defense has been suspect, but I, along with the odds makers, really would be stunned even worse if the Rams were to lose this game this weekend. Another one, the Packers versus the Bears, which is a historic rivalry, but they rarely play in the playoffs. They rarely meet in the playoffs. It's only the third time that the Packers and Bears have met in the playoffs in 100 years. That's pretty amazing, considering that they play each other twice a year. Now, they've split their season, so this third game they're playing will be the tiebreaker. Chicago Bears are the number 2 seed, so the Green Bay is going to have to play in Chicago. In Chicago. And we'll see what happens. It should be another good game. They've had some good games already, so we'll see what happens. Number 5, the Eagles attempt to repeat. this has not been like the typical thing where, like, say, Kansas City, who goes in every year and seems to look so good going even into the playoffs and then wins. The Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl last year and have been looking very inconsistent. You just don't know what to expect this year. But they're the defending champions. So somebody's going to have to knock them off. And the 49ers will be the first one with the opportunity. They're going into Philadelphia to play. So we'll see what happens with that. But it should be a good game. I mean, the Eagles offense is suspect, but then obviously the 49ers defense has been pretty bad this year, especially after they lost their two best players. So that'll be a big game. So the Eagles' attempt to repeat will be something to watch. Number 6, the Buffalo Bills versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's probably, among many people's thought, possibly the best game this weekend. Because the thought is that the winner of this game, I've heard this by more than one analyst, the winner of this game could possibly make it to the Super Bowl. So they're considering this a big game. And it's high scoring. I mean, the odds makers are giving it a 51 points on this game. So they're expecting it to be a high scoring game as well. And we'll see what happens. You've got two quarterbacks that are pretty close in numbers. When you, in total touchdowns this year, for example, Josh Allen has 39 total touchdowns. That's passing and running. Trevor Lawrence has 38. So one touchdown difference. A lot of their stats are similar. Points per game, I was showing you earlier, very similar. Less than a half a point difference between them in that category. Buffalo is a little bit better in total offense, but their defense is a little more suspect. So it should be a good game. We'll find out how good a game it is, but there are a lot of the odds makers and analysts are expecting it to be one of the best games to watch. Number 7, and this is just not really something to watch, but for Denver and Seattle, they get to watch the games and sit back and see who will be their competition in the next week after this and who they're going to have to face. They'll play, obviously, the lowest seeding winner, whoever that is, they'll play those teams. So we'll find out after Monday where everybody else is going. All right, number 8, which teams will handle the pressure? This is kind of interesting, and this happens every year. You don't expect it. At the beginning of the season, every single year, almost half or more of the teams that made the playoffs the year before don't make it the next year. And this year, you would have never said, nobody would have said the Kansas City Chiefs are not going to make the playoffs this year. The Baltimore Ravens aren't going to make the playoffs, but they didn't. You just don't know who it will be, but some team will not make the playoffs that you expected to be there. And in fact, 5 of the 8 division winners didn't even make the playoffs last year. The Patriots weren't in the playoffs. They won their division. The Jaguars weren't even close to making the playoffs. They won theirs. Same with the Bears. They won their division. The Carolina Panthers won their division, even though it was very tight. And then the Seattle Seahawks won their division. They had a good record last year, but they missed the playoffs. But they made it this year. Those 5 teams, how is that going to play out for them, not having been in the playoffs, not being that familiar with the playoffs? Is that pressure for them, or is it just give them more of an open-handed take on it? On the other hand, you got Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. There's been so much talk about them being the last team from the old guard standing. This is Buffalo Bills' chance finally to make it to the Super Bowl. Is that pressure? To me, that seems like a lot of pressure. I mean, I've heard some stats, and I really don't buy into the stats too much about past seasons. And you wonder how really the teams feel about it. But the pressure on Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills to win, to move past the first or second round, to finally make it to the playoffs, that's heavy. And I've heard rumors, what happens to the coach, McDermott, if they get beat this first game of the playoffs. On top of that, Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills haven't won a road playoff game in years and years. So there's a lot of pressure on them, particularly, I think, almost among every team, that they have to win. We'll see what happens with that. Now, number 9, potential final runs for big-name veterans. This is primarily Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford. They're both in the playoffs, and kind of wondering what will happen after this. Aaron Rodgers sounded like he was going to retire after the season, but, now he seems a little bit more wishy-washy about it. We'll see what happens. The same with Matthew Stafford. He's had such a good year. And there was a lot of talk about at the beginning of the season, was he even going to be able to play the entire season? He had so many back issues, but he's played the entire season. He's looked good. In fact, he's MVP candidate. And if he's healthy and he feels better than he did at the beginning of last year, will he come back for another year? Now, he's, about 5 years younger than Aaron Rodgers, so he definitely would consider it, but he's had such a good year. What happens if Matthew Stafford and the Rams win the Super Bowl? Does it, or even Aaron Rodgers, which I think is much more unlikely, do they decide, hey, what better way to end my career? So that could be a case too, but we'll see what happens with them. And finally, number 10, the weather and road environments. Now, none of these weather games are going to be dramatically too bad anyway. Like the Rams are going to Carolina. Most for them, it's the distance they have to travel is the bigger issue than the weather. The weather is going to be 71 degrees, so it shouldn't be too bad. Now, the 49ers go to Chicago. That's the difference. They have to travel. It's going to be about 33 degrees, 40% chance of snow in that game. So that could be a little bit more. Actually, Packers are going to Chicago, so they don't care. Packers face the same or worse weather than Chicago, so it won't matter to them. The 49ers are going to the Eagles. That game shouldn't be too bad. 45 degrees, that's nice weather for the players to play in. Maybe a slight chance of rain, that's it. Now, Jacksonville is the same way. Buffalo's coming down to Jacksonville, but it's supposed to be 67 degrees, no wind, partly cloudy, so it won't even be that sunny. So the weather should not be a factor, just the travel, and even that isn't that far for Buffalo to come down to Jacksonville. Now, the New England Patriots, the Chargers play them. It's going to be 35 degrees. It's a travel, that's a long trip for the Chargers. 20% chance of snow in that game, so that could be a little bit of interesting weather. We'll see what happens. And then Pittsburgh Steelers. In Pittsburgh, it's going to be 33 degrees, but I don't see that as being too much of a problem. So really, these particular road games, now maybe next week it'll be colder in some places and we'll see what happens. But the weather shouldn't be too bad. Maybe some of the road trip travel for some of these teams might be something to deal with. All right. Let's look at, and we'll wrap it up with this, top 10 teams' odds to win the Super Bowl. I find this pretty interesting, but the Seattle Seahawks are number 1. Their odds to win the Super Bowl are plus 375. And hey, when you get to skip the first game, that gives you a heads up there. You don't even have to worry about anybody getting injured. You get an extra week to get some people healthy and just get some good rest, and get planned for whoever you're going to play in 2 weeks or a week from Sunday. Number 2 is the Los Angeles Rams are at plus 425. And again, this has been some kind of division. Seattle Seahawks, the Rams, and the 49ers, who are not in this top 10, but they're all 3 of them came from the same division. They're all in the playoffs. They all had really good records. But Seattle Seahawks number 1, the Rams number 2. So what that tells you is one of them has to lose. One of those 2 teams, they could face each other again for the 3rd time to see which one of the 2 goes to the Super Bowl. And I do think one of those 2 will make it to the Super Bowl. Number 3, Denver Broncos are at plus 650. They get the bye week as well, so that's a leg up for them. Number 4, the Philadelphia Eagles are plus 850. So double what the Rams or the Seahawks are. And again, looking at this list, every team, well, they're number 4. And so, I still think it's going to be Seahawks or Rams. I really don't consider the Eagles. I just don't see it. Their offense has been too flaky the entire year. We'll see what happens. Number 5, tied for number 5 is the Buffalo Bills at plus 1,000 and the New England Patriots at plus 1,000. So a big difference between them and even the Denver Broncos, who would be the other AFC team that they would have to probably face. So we'll see what happens between the Bills, and who knows who plays who here. It's going to depend. If the Bills win, it depends on if they're the lowest seed winning, whether they would play the Broncos or the Patriots. We'd have to wait and see what happens there. But obviously, one of those top 3 teams isn't going to make it between the Broncos, the Bills, and the Patriots. Those 2 teams are tied for 5th, the Bills and the Patriots, at plus 1,000. Number 7, plus 1,300, Houston Texans are number 7. They're plus 1,300. So really the odds are getting pretty high that they would make the playoffs. Number 8, Jacksonville Jaguars at plus 1,500. And then to round it out at number tied for 9th, the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers at plus 2,200. So if you didn't make the top 10, you're worse than plus 2,200. So number tied for 9th, plus 2,200, the Bears and the Packers versus the Seattle Seahawks are at plus 375. Big difference. And what I find interesting about this is, and this is and I'm going to play it myself here right now, and the Jaguars have been playing this, is the no respect card, just acting as if the Jaguars are just a passing fancy or something, and they don't have that good of a team. The Jaguars have beaten, they beat the Denver Broncos, who are 3rd here. They beat the Houston Texans. They lost to the Houston Texans in one game when they were up by 19 with only a few minutes to go. It was a major collapse, but they put 30 points on the Houston Texans twice, and supposedly the best defense. And yet they have a worse chance to win the Super Bowl, according to the odds makers, than the Houston Texans. I just find that amazing. The odds here. Now, I do get the Seattle Seahawks and the Rams being 1-2. Seattle Seahawks have beaten everybody this season pretty much. They lost 3 games, but they've beaten the Rams. They beat the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville. So I get that. But I just don't get the Jaguars being 8th. Now, we'll see. Buffalo's coming to Jacksonville. They could stomp them, and then, or even just win, and then the odds makers are right. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens in that game. That game's a big game in all kinds of ways. All right, that's my look at different categories. We're off into the playoffs now, and that's exciting. So starting next week, like I said, I'll be having a podcast 3 times a week. And next week, I'll do it from Tuesday through Thursday, I think, because I want to be able to talk about all the playoff games. If I do one on Monday, I'll have to wait and do that Monday game on Tuesday, separate from the rest of the games. But I think I'll wait till Tuesday and do the first podcast, cover all the games, and we'll look at that. It should be exciting. Really looking forward to some fun games to watch and not just blowouts, unless, of course, the Jaguars blow out Buffalo. That would be fine. But otherwise, I'm looking for some close games and fun games to watch for the entertainment value. But I'll be watching all of them, and then I'll report back to you on Tuesday what I saw, some of the interesting stats that came out of those games, anybody that maybe set an NFL record for a playoff game, whether it's a game or whatever stat might come up. All right. You can find this podcast on Just the Stats NFL on YouTube, where you'll see the charts that I put up, these odds and the top 10 list I put up and so forth. And you can also listen to it, of course, on YouTube or Spotify, Apple, whatever app you might use. Please like and subscribe. But thank you for all the subscribers that have been signing on. And I look forward to the playoff games, and I hope you do too. Hope your team wins, unless it's Buffalo. And I'll see you on Tuesday. So for NFL top 10s for Friday, I'm out.